The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, a sound that was usually drowned out by the noise of students moving through crowded hallways. But on this day, it was all that anyone could hear. The announcement had come without warning, without the usual testing signal or the calm preface of "this is a drill." Instead, the intercom crackled violently, and a distorted, unnatural voice declared, "This is a lockdown. Do not open the doors. Do not look outside. Remain silent." Teachers froze mid-sentence. Students exchanged nervous glances, and then chaos quietly funneled into a fragile silence. The scraping of chairs, the slam of classroom doors, the shuffling of sneakers until everything stopped once the lights dimmed and shades were drawn. At first, everyone thought it was just another safety drill, the kind that happened once every semester. But drills usually came with schedules, emails, reminders. This one had come like a command from nowhere, heavy and absolute. And then came the footsteps. At first distant, almost indistinguishable from the creaks of an old building, but slowly, deliberately, they grew louder, moving down the hallway outside. They weren't the confident steps of an officer, nor the hurried strides of a teacher. They were light, dragging, irregular, as though someone was being pulled against their will, or something half-human was pacing deliberately outside the locked doors. This was the first moment when students realized they weren't safe. In fact, they were trapped, helpless, inside their own classrooms, with nowhere to go and nothing to protect them but thin walls and silence. What makes this one of the most disturbing, scary school lockdown stories you want to forget is not just the unnatural sound, but the detail every student in that hallway later whispered about the smell that crept in underneath the doors. Not the sterile scent of cleaning supplies or the dusty musk of old books, but something raw, metallic, and unmistakably like blood. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly as students sat huddled under desks, clutching phones they weren't allowed to use, trying to stop their breathing from echoing too loudly in the silent rooms. Every sound became amplified: the thump of someone's heartbeat, the stifled sob of a girl who couldn't hold it in, the tapping of nails against tile as though something was crawling along the floor outside. In one classroom, a boy swore he saw a shadow pass by the crack under the door, too large to belong to any teacher, too slow to be human. In another, students heard scratching, deliberate and metallic, like claws dragging across their door. Teachers tried to reassure them with whispered words, but the truth was written across their pale faces. They were just as terrified as the children. When the lockdown finally ended, when the intercom suddenly clicked and the distorted voice declared all clear, everyone expected to see police waiting. Instead, the hallways were empty. Not a single officer had arrived. The scratch marks were still there on the doors, etched deep into the paint, but the security cameras showed nothing. Nothing at all. The school tried to explain it away, to dismiss it as mass hysteria, but the fear clung to everyone who lived through it. And just as parents demanded answers, the school conveniently announced a scheduled drill the following week, almost as if they wanted to bury the memory of what had happened. But the students knew this was no drill. This was something else entirely, something that still lingered in the halls after the lights went out. That's what made this story different from urban legends. This wasn't whispers about ghostly janitors or cursed classrooms. These was real, documented, and it spread online quickly, joining the ranks of the most disturbing, scary school lockdown stories you won't forget. But there are more accounts, each one stranger and darker than the last, each one blending the mundane reality of a lockdown with the horrific possibility that not all of these events are human in origin. In one high school overseas, the intercom announced a lockdown in the middle of the morning. The voice that spoke wasn't the principal's or anyone familiar. It was mechanical, hollow, almost inhuman. It repeated the same sentence over and over. Do not open the doors. Do not look out the windows. For 3 hours, the students obeyed, their teachers trembling in silence. They heard noises in the hallways, like chairs dragging across the floor and lockers slamming shut, though every classroom door was locked, and no one dared peek out. When the local police finally arrived, demanding to know why the entire building had gone dark, they realized there had been no official lockdown. No threat, no intruder, no police dispatch. The principal swore the intercom had not been used, but the students swore they had heard it. Later, When the school tried to replay the audio system, there was nothing, no recording, no file, nothing stored in the machines. Yet hundreds of students had heard the exact same voice. Some skeptics called it a psychological trick, a case of mass hysteria. But survivors whisper something else. That the announcement wasn't meant to keep something out. It was meant to keep something already inside from reaching them. And if that's true, then we may never know what stalked those hallways. While the children waited in silence. This is why these tales have been passed around as disturbing, scary school lockdown stories you want to forget. Because even if you try to explain them, the details don't add up, and the fear they leave behind never goes away. The most unsettling of these stories involve disappearances. In one anonymous case, a lockdown was called in the middle of the day after reports of a stranger wandering the school grounds. Students huddled in a science lab, sitting under tables while the teacher locked the door and whispered strict instructions. Among them was a girl named Maya, who sat next to her best friend. But something about her friend didn't seem right. Her skin was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, and though Maya whispered her name again and again, she received no response. Suddenly, the fire alarm blared, interrupting the silence, filling the room with chaos and confusion. When the students rushed out, Maya lost sight of her friend. But here is where the story gets terrifying. When the panic cleared and the students regrouped outside, her best friend was nowhere to be found, not missing in the crowd. Not accounted for by police. She was simply gone. Her backpack and shoes were still in the classroom, sitting untouched, but she had vanished completely. School officials denied the disappearance. The police claimed no report had been filed, and parents were told to stop asking questions. To this day, Maya insists her friend was taken during that lockdown, not by a human, but by something that had entered the building under the cover of silence. This story has circulated online in forums, podcasts, and horror channels alike. Another addition to the list of disturbing, scary school lockdown stories you won't forget. Because the idea of someone vanishing in front of dozens of witnesses without a trace is horrifying, in a way no ghost story could ever match. And perhaps the most terrifying part of all is not the stories themselves, but the thought that these could happen anywhere, at any time, in any school in the world. Lockdowns are supposed to be about safety, about protection, about following procedures that guarantee survival. But what if sometimes the procedures themselves become traps? What if the very act of hiding in silence only makes you pray for something unseen, something that knows you are trapped, defenseless, and waiting? These disturbing, scary school lockdown stories you won't forget leave us with unsettling questions about reality, control, and fear. The unknown presence in the hallways, the vanishing students, the false announcements are these urban legends, or are they proof that some schools carry a darker history than anyone is willing to admit? So the next time the lights flicker overhead, the PA system crackles to life, and a lockdown is announced without warning, remember what you behooves to heard. Ask yourself, is this just a drill, or is something already waiting on the other side of the door? Because sometimes, the scariest thing is not what's outside trying to get in, but what you can't see inside with you. And if you think this story was chilling, you'll want to be careful where you click next, because if you dare, click here for the next nightmare. A story even darker than this one. A story that will crawl into your mind and make sure you never look at schools the same way again.